You have arrived here perhaps because something stirs within you at the mention of emptiness. Not the emptiness of a vacant room or an unfilled calendar, but that peculiar hollowness that haunts the human soul in moments when all external noise falls silent. If you have felt this, then know this. We do not gather merely to discuss sadness or melancholy. No, we are here to descend into the labyrinthine chambers of the psyche where emptiness dwells, not as visitor, but as architect. When I speak of emptiness, I do not speak of the temporary void left by loss or disappointment. I speak of something far more ancient and profound, a systematic excavation of the self that begins not in adulthood, but in the earliest moments when consciousness first encounters the world and finds it wanting. This emptiness is not merely felt, it is constructed brick by psychological brick until it becomes the very foundation upon which we build our lives. But we must be wary of concepts made palatable by popular psychology. When emptiness becomes a trending topic, it has usually been stripped of its terror and its wisdom. The emptiness I speak of is not a problem to be solved with affirmations or weekend retreats. It is an archetypal force, older than language, that speaks to something fundamental about the human condition. In my years of working with those who carry this weight, I have come to understand that emptiness is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything we have learned to reject about ourselves. It is not a vacuum, but a repository, a psychic storage facility where we house all the parts of our being that were deemed unacceptable, unlovable, or unsafe to express. Imagine a child who learns early that their authentic emotions are too much for their caregivers to handle. Slowly, methodically, they begin to hollow themselves out, creating space not for genuine feeling, but for the performance of feeling. They become masters of mimicry, learning to reflect back what others need to see, while their true self retreats deeper and deeper into the shadows of their own psyche. That child grows into an adult who feels empty, not because they lack substance, but because they have exiled their substance to the underworld of their own consciousness. There is a dream that visits many of those who struggle with this profound emptiness. They find themselves in a house, sometimes their childhood home, sometimes a place they have never seen, and room after room, they discover that the house is completely hollow. The walls are there, the structure intact, but inside there is nothing. No furniture, no photographs, no evidence that anyone has ever truly lived there. They wake from this dream with a sense of recognition that chills them to the bone, for they understand that the house is themselves. But this emptiness, this hollowing out, does not happen in isolation. It is a response to a world that demands we be anything other than what we truly are. From our earliest moments, we encounter invisible forces, family dynamics, cultural expectations, social pressures that shape us not through malice, but through unconscious patterns that have been passed down through generations. The empty person has learned to survive by becoming a mirror for others' needs. They develop an exquisite sensitivity to the emotional climate around them, not out of natural empathy, but out of necessity. They learn to read the room, to adjust their energy, to become whatever will keep them safe from abandonment or rejection. But in this process of endless adaptation, they lose track of their own emotional landscape until they no longer know what they genuinely feel or want or need. This is not weakness. This is survival strategy elevated to art form. But what begins as protection becomes prison. The very mechanisms that once kept them safe now keep them isolated from their own experience. They move through life like actors who have forgotten they are performing, so deeply have they inhabited their roles. In the therapeutic work, I have encountered individuals who can articulate everyone else's emotions with startling accuracy, but become speechless when asked to describe their own inner state. They know intimately what their partner needs, what their children require, what their colleagues expect, but when pressed to identify their own desires, they encounter only silence. Not peaceful silence, but the deafening quiet of a self that has been systematically erased. There is a particular quality to this emptiness that distinguishes it from depression or grief. Those who are depressed feel heavy. Those who are empty feel weightless. Those who grieve mourn something specific. Those who are empty cannot even identify what they have lost because they never fully possessed it in the first place. They are haunted not by memories but by absences, not by what was but by what never had the chance to be. The empty person often excels at caring for others. They become the ones others turn to in crisis, the reliable presence, the steady friend. But this caring, while genuine in its expression, is often rooted not in abundance, but in avoidance. By focusing on others' needs, they can avoid the terrifying confrontation with their own inner void. They mistake being needed for being loved, and in doing so, they perpetuate their own exile from authentic connection. This pattern creates a paradox. The more empty they feel, the more they give to others, and the more they give to others, the more empty they become. It is a closed circuit that generates the very thing it seeks to avoid. They become addicted to being indispensable because being needed feels like proof of existence, even if it is not proof of being truly seen or loved for who they are. But we must understand that this emptiness is not merely personal pathology. It is, in many ways, a reasonable response to living in a culture that values productivity over presence, performance over authenticity, having over being. We live in a world that asks us to optimize ourselves, to brand ourselves, to curate ourselves for public consumption. In such an environment, the development of an authentic self, messy, contradictory, sometimes inconvenient, becomes almost revolutionary. The empty person has simply taken this cultural message to its logical extreme. They have become the perfect consumer of external validation, the ideal candidate for any system that promises to tell them who they should be. They are perpetually seeking the next book, the next technique, the next relationship that will finally fill the void. But the void cannot be filled from the outside because it was not created by external absence. It was created by internal rejection. There is a story from ancient mythology that speaks to this condition. A young person falls in love with their own reflection in a pool of water, unable to touch or possess the image they see. They waste away, captivated by something that is both themselves and not themselves, real and unreal, present and absent. This is the predicament of the empty soul, forever seeking themselves in reflections that can never satisfy because they mistake the image for the reality. In the modern context, this myth plays out through endless scrolling on social media, through relationships where we lose ourselves in the other person, through careers where we become our roles, through achievements that promise to finally prove our worth. But each external validation is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much we pour in, it never holds. The particularly insidious aspect of this emptiness is that it often masquerades as spirituality or selflessness. The empty person may genuinely believe they are evolved because they have no preferences, no strong opinions, no inconvenient needs. They may pride themselves on their flexibility, their ability to go with the flow, their lack of ego. But this is not transcendence, it is abdication. True spiritual development requires first having a self to transcend. In my work, I have seen individuals who have spent decades in meditation retreats, therapy groups, and self-help seminars, always seeking something outside themselves to fill the inner void. They become what I call spiritual consumers, forever ingesting new techniques and philosophies, but never digesting them into genuine transformation. They know all the right words, can speak fluently about consciousness and healing, but underneath remains that same hollow echo. The path out of this emptiness begins with a counterintuitive step. We must first fully inhabit the emptiness rather than flee from it. We must turn toward the void with curiosity rather than fear, with compassion rather than judgment. This is not masochism but archaeology. We are excavating the ruins of our authentic self to understand how it came to be buried. But this journey requires tremendous courage because it means confronting not just our own pain, but the pain of those who shaped us. It means recognizing that the parents who taught us to be empty may themselves have been empty. It means understanding that the systems that demanded our conformity may have been unconsciously cruel. It means grieving not just what we lost, but what we never had the chance to develop. The empty person must learn to sit with discomfort without immediately seeking to soothe it. They must practice the radical act of not knowing what others need from them, of not automatically adjusting their energy to match the room. They must risk the terrifying possibility that if they stop performing, they might discover there is nothing underneath, or worse, that there is something underneath that others might reject. This is the great fear that keeps the empty person trapped. If I am truly myself, I will be alone. But this fear is based on a false premise, that their authentic self is somehow less worthy of love than their performed self. In reality, the opposite is true. The performed self can only attract relationships based on performance, which inevitably feel hollow and unsustaining. Only the authentic self can attract authentic connection. But before we can inhabit our authentic self, we must first reclaim all the parts of ourselves that we exiled to create the emptiness. This means descending into our own psychological underworld to retrieve the anger we learned was unacceptable, the sadness we were told was too much, the joy we feared would make others uncomfortable, the desires we believed were selfish. This retrieval work is not comfortable. It means feeling things we have spent years avoiding feeling. It means acknowledging needs we have spent decades denying. It means risking the stability of relationships built on our emptiness. But it is the only path to genuine fullness, not the artificial fullness of external validation, but the organic fullness of being completely ourselves. The journey through emptiness is ultimately a journey home to ourselves. But home in this case is not a place we return to. It is a place we must build, often from scratch, using materials we have never learned to work with. Our own feelings, desires, boundaries, and authentic responses to life. This construction project requires patience because we are essentially learning a new language, the language of our own inner experience. We must become fluent in the subtle signals our body sends us, the whispered messages from our intuition, the complex landscape of our emotional world. We must learn to distinguish between what we genuinely think and what we think we should think, between what we actually feel and what we believe we are allowed to feel. In this process of self-discovery, we encounter what I call the guardian at the threshold. This guardian is not an external force, but an internal one, the part of our psyche that has been protecting us from ourselves for so long that it has forgotten how to let us through. This guardian speaks in the voice of our deepest fears. If you feel too much, you will be overwhelmed. If you want too much, you will be disappointed. If you are too much, you will be abandoned. This guardian has good intentions, but it operates from outdated information. It still believes we are that vulnerable child who needed to disappear in order to survive. It does not yet understand that we are now adults capable of handling our own emotional reality, capable of setting boundaries, capable of choosing relationships that honor rather than exploit our sensitivity. To pass this guardian, we must neither fight it nor surrender to it. We must dialogue with it. We must acknowledge its service while gently explaining that its methods are no longer necessary. This is delicate work because the guardian has been our faithful protector, even as it has become our jailer. We must honor what it has done for us while asserting our readiness to live more fully. But as we begin this dialogue, as we start to reclaim our exiled parts, we often encounter what feels like chaos. Emotions that have been suppressed for decades begin to surface. We may find ourselves crying without knowing why, or feeling angry about things that happened years ago, or experiencing joy so intense it frightens us. This is not pathology, this is thaw. What has been frozen is beginning to move again. Many people panic at this stage and retreat back into emptiness because emptiness, for all its pain, is familiar. It is predictable. We know how to function when we feel nothing. But learning to function while feeling everything, this requires a complete restructuring of our relationship with ourselves and our world. During this thawing process, we may discover that our entire sense of identity has been built around our emptiness. We may realize that we have no idea who we are when we are not busy being who others need us to be. This identity crisis is not a sign that we are moving in the wrong direction. It is evidence that we are finally moving toward truth. In the therapeutic encounter, I have witnessed this moment of recognition countless times, when a person suddenly understands that they have been living as a ghost in their own life. The realization is simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means acknowledging how much life has been unlived, how many opportunities for genuine connection have been missed. Liberating because it means the possibility of authentic existence is finally within reach. But this recognition brings with it a profound grief that must be honored. We must mourn the years spent in exile from ourselves. We must grieve the relationships that were built on our absence rather than our presence. We must feel the full weight of what it cost us to survive by disappearing. This grief is not self-pity. It is necessary mourning for a self that was never allowed to fully exist. As we move through this grief, we begin to understand that our emptiness was not just personal, but generational. We carry within us the unfelt feelings of our ancestors, the unlived lives of those who came before us. Our parents may have taught us to be empty because they themselves were empty. Having learned from their parents who learned from their parents in an unbroken chain of unconscious transmission. This understanding brings both compassion and responsibility. Compassion because we recognize that everyone in this chain was doing the best they could with the consciousness they had available. Responsibility because we realize that we have the power to break this chain, to stop passing emptiness to the next generation, to transform what has been a legacy of absence into a legacy of presence. But breaking generational patterns requires more than individual healing. It requires us to examine the larger systems that create and perpetuate emptiness. We live in a culture that profits from our disconnection from ourselves. Empty people make better consumers because they are always seeking external solutions to internal problems. Empty people make better workers because they can more easily subsume their identity into their roles. Empty people make better citizens of systems that require compliance rather than creativity. To heal our emptiness, we must become conscious of these larger forces and how they operate within us. We must recognize when we are being invited to disappear, when our authentic responses are being discouraged, when our genuine needs are being pathologized. We must learn to distinguish between healthy adaptation and self-erasure. This discernment requires us to develop what I call an internal compass, a felt sense of what is true for us in any given moment. This compass has been dormant in the empty person, overwhelmed by external signals and expectations. Reactivating it is like learning to use a muscle that has been paralyzed. At first, the signals are weak and inconsistent. We may mistake anxiety for excitement or obligation for desire. But with practice, the compass becomes more reliable, more nuanced, more trustworthy. As this internal compass strengthens, we begin to make different choices. We may find ourselves saying no to things we would have automatically agreed to before. We may discover preferences we did not know we had. We may feel drawn to experiences, people, or activities that our empty self would have dismissed as irrelevant or selfish. These changes can be disorienting, not just for us, but for everyone in our orbit who has grown accustomed to our predictable absence. The people in our lives may resist our emerging authenticity, especially if they have benefited from our emptiness. They may unconsciously attempt to pull us back into our familiar role as the one who adapts, who accommodates, who disappears when convenient. This resistance is not necessarily malicious. It is the natural response of any system when one of its components begins to change. But we must be prepared for it and not allow it to derail our journey toward wholeness. Learning to tolerate others' discomfort with our authenticity is perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of healing emptiness. We have been trained to prioritize others' comfort over our own truth. To reverse this programming requires immense courage and constant vigilance. We must learn to feel the pull of old patterns without automatically obeying them. We must develop the capacity to remain present to ourselves even when others are pressuring us to disappear. This is where the work becomes truly transformational. When we can stay connected to our inner experience while navigating external pressure, we develop what mature psychology calls differentiation, the ability to be ourselves in relationship rather than losing ourselves in relationship. This is not selfishness, it is self-responsibility. It is the foundation of all healthy connection, but differentiation requires boundaries, and empty people often have no concept of healthy boundaries. They have lived as energetic sponges, absorbing whatever emotional atmosphere surrounds them. Learning to maintain their own energetic integrity while remaining open to connection is like learning to be a semi-permeable membrane rather than either a wall or a sieve. These boundaries are not built through force or rigidity, but through clarity. When we are clear about who we are and what we need, boundaries become natural expressions of that clarity rather than defensive fortifications against the world. They become ways of honoring both ourselves and others by creating space for authentic relationship rather than enmeshment or performance. As we develop this clarity and these boundaries, we may be surprised to discover that we actually have quite strong preferences, opinions, and desires. The empty self believed it was adaptable and easygoing, but this was often just paralysis masquerading as flexibility. When we reconnect with our authentic responses to life, we may find that we are actually quite particular, quite passionate, quite definite about many things. This definiteness can feel foreign at first, even frightening. We may worry that having strong preferences makes us difficult or demanding. But preferences are not demands. They are simply information about what resonates with our authentic self. Learning to honor this information without insisting that others accommodate it is part of the maturation process. The journey out of emptiness is not linear. There will be days when we feel fully present to ourselves and others when we slip back into the familiar patterns of disappearance. This is normal and expected. Healing happens in spirals, not straight lines. Each return to emptiness can become an opportunity to understand the pattern more deeply, to catch ourselves earlier in the cycle, to choose differently next time. What emerges from this long journey is not the person we thought we should be, but the person we actually are. Complex, contradictory, sometimes inconvenient, always unique. This person may be nothing like what we or others expected. They may have interests that surprise everyone, may need things that seem unreasonable, may respond to life in ways that challenge assumptions about who they are supposed to be. But this person is real in a way that the empty self never was. They have substance, texture, depth. They can form genuine connections because they have something genuine to connect with. They can love authentically because they have learned to love themselves. They can contribute meaningfully to the world because they are drawing from their own deep well rather than trying to give what they do not possess. The transformation from emptiness to fullness is ultimately not about adding something to ourselves, but about removing the barriers that have kept us from experiencing what was always already there. Beneath the emptiness lies not more emptiness, but our essential self, the self we were before we learned to be someone else, the self that has been waiting patiently for our return. This essential self is not perfect or enlightened or free from struggle. It is simply real. It feels genuine emotions, has authentic responses, makes honest choices based on its own inner truth rather than external expectations. It can be hurt but also healed, can be disappointed but also delighted, can be alone but is never empty because it is finally, fully inhabited. This inhabited self carries within it a paradox that the empty person never could have imagined. The more fully we become ourselves, the more we realize how interconnected we are with everything around us. The empty self believed it was separate, isolated, cut off from the world by its own absence. But the authentic self discovers that it is woven into the fabric of existence in ways that the performing self never was. When we are truly present to ourselves, we become truly present to others. When we can feel our own emotions without being overwhelmed by them, we can witness others' emotions without absorbing them. When we know our own needs, we can recognize and respect the needs of others without automatically sacrificing our own. This is not the cold detachment of withdrawal, but the warm engagement of two whole people meeting each other in truth. But this meeting in truth requires us to confront something that terrifies the empty person, the possibility of conflict. The empty self avoided conflict at all costs because any disagreement felt like a threat to survival. If others were displeased, the empty self believed it might cease to exist entirely. So it learned to agree, to accommodate, to shapeshift into whatever would maintain harmony, even if that harmony was built on lies. The authentic self must learn a different relationship with conflict. It must understand that disagreement is not destruction, that tension can be creative rather than catastrophic, that saying no to others can actually be a way of saying yes to deeper connection. When we stop pretending to agree with everything, our genuine agreements become meaningful. When we stop automatic accommodation, our chosen generosity becomes precious. This shift from automatic harmony to conscious choice transforms every relationship in our life. Some relationships will deepen as they are freed from the burden of our performance. Others will fall away as they are revealed to have been built entirely on our absence. This sorting process can be painful, but it is also liberating. We discover who loves the real us and who only loved the convenient us. In the space where emptiness once lived, we begin to cultivate what I have come to call presence. Presence is not the opposite of emptiness, it is emptiness transformed. Where emptiness was absence masquerading as adaptability, presence is fullness expressing itself as availability. Where emptiness was a void that consumed everything around it, presence is a space that can hold whatever arises without being destroyed by it. This presence has a quality that the empty self never possessed. It can be alone without being lonely. The empty self experienced aloneness as abandonment, as evidence of its unworthiness, as a confirmation of its worst fears about itself. But presence experiences aloneness as completeness, as an opportunity for deep communion with the mystery of existence, as a reminder that we are never truly separate from the larger web of being. Learning to be alone with ourselves without immediately seeking distraction or company is perhaps one of the most radical acts of the modern world. We live in a culture of constant stimulation, endless connectivity, perpetual entertainment. To sit quietly with our own presence, to listen to our own thoughts, to feel our own feelings without immediately sharing them or analyzing them or trying to fix them, this has become almost revolutionary. In this solitude, we discover something astonishing. We are interesting, not in the way that we performed interest for others, but genuinely fascinating to ourselves. We have inner landscapes that are vast and varied, emotional terrains that shift and change like weather, thoughts that surprise us with their creativity and insight. The person we discover in solitude bears little resemblance to the empty shell we once believed ourselves to be. But this discovery of our own interest comes with a responsibility. We must learn to be good company for ourselves. We must develop the capacity to entertain ourselves, to soothe ourselves, to challenge ourselves, to forgive ourselves. We must become the kind of friend to ourselves that we have always wanted others to be, patient, understanding, encouraging, but also honest and growth-oriented. This internal friendship transforms our external relationships because we are no longer looking to others to provide what we can now give ourselves. We do not need others to validate our existence because we can feel our own aliveness. We do not need others to entertain us because we have learned to find life endlessly fascinating. We do not need others to complete us because we have discovered that we were never incomplete, only unconscious of our completeness. From this place of internal friendship, we can engage with others from abundance rather than deficit. We can offer our genuine attention instead of our desperate need for attention. We can share our authentic thoughts instead of saying what we think others want to hear. We can express our real feelings instead of reflecting back the emotions we sense in the room. This shift from deficit to abundance is perhaps the most significant transformation in the journey from emptiness to presence. The empty self was always asking, "What can I get from this interaction? How can I be seen, validated, loved, needed?" The present self asks different questions. What can I offer? How can I show up authentically? What does this moment want from me? These questions arise not from self-sacrifice, but from self-expression. When we are full of ourselves, not in the arrogant sense, but in the sense of being genuinely inhabited by our own presence, we naturally overflow. We have energy to give because we are no longer leaking energy through the cracks in our foundation. We have love to offer because we have learned to love ourselves. We have wisdom to share because we have done the deep work of understanding our own experience. But this overflow is not indiscriminate. The present self has learned discernment. It knows the difference between giving from abundance and giving from compulsion. It can distinguish between genuine generosity and the old pattern of buying love through service. It understands that not everyone is ready to receive what it has to offer, and that forcing gifts upon unwilling recipients is a form of violence, however well-intentioned. This discernment extends to how we use our energy throughout the day. The empty self said yes to everything because it had no sense of its own priorities, no connection to its own values, no awareness of its own limits. The present self has learned to ask, "Is this aligned with who I am? Does this serve my highest good and the highest good of others? Can I engage with this fully, or am I just going through the motions?" These questions help us make choices that honor our authentic self rather than betraying it. They help us invest our life force in ways that generate more life force rather than depleting it. They guide us toward experiences, relationships, and activities that feed our soul rather than drain it. As we learn to make these aligned choices, we begin to experience something the empty self never knew: genuine satisfaction. Not the temporary high of external validation, but the deep contentment that comes from living in accordance with our own truth. This satisfaction is not dependent on outcomes or achievements. It arises simply from the experience of being fully ourselves in whatever we are doing. This satisfaction has a quality that surprises many people. It includes struggle. The empty self avoided difficulty because it had no resources to meet challenges. But the present self discovers that struggle, when it is chosen rather than imposed, when it is aligned with our values rather than contrary to them, can be deeply fulfilling. We can work hard, face obstacles, even fail at things we care about, and still feel satisfied because we showed up as ourselves in the process. This relationship with struggle transforms our entire approach to growth and change. The empty self was always looking for the easy way, the shortcut, the technique that would fix everything without requiring real transformation. But the present self understands that meaningful change requires us to walk through difficulty, not around it. It recognizes that the very challenges we most want to avoid are often the ones that offer the greatest opportunity for expansion. In my work with individuals making this journey, I have observed that there comes a moment when they stop asking, "How can I get rid of this emptiness?" and start asking, "What is this emptiness trying to teach me?" This shift in questioning marks a crucial turning point. It signals the beginning of a collaborative relationship with their own experience rather than an adversarial one. When we approach our emptiness as teacher rather than enemy, we discover that it has been holding important information for us. It has been showing us exactly where we abandoned ourselves, exactly what we need to reclaim, exactly how we learned to disappear. This information is not comfortable, but it is invaluable. It provides a map for the journey home to ourselves. Following this map requires us to revisit scenes from our past with new eyes. We must look again at the moments when we first learned that our authentic self was too much, too little, too different, too threatening. We must feel again the pain of those early rejections, but this time with adult consciousness that can metabolize the experience differently. This revisiting is not about blame or resentment, it is about understanding and integration. We need to understand how our emptiness developed so that we can consciously choose differently. We need to integrate the parts of ourselves that were exiled so that we can be whole. This process requires tremendous compassion for the child we were who made the best choices available at the time. But it also requires us to take responsibility for the adult we are now. We cannot change what happened to us, but we can change how we relate to what happened to us. We cannot control how others respond to our authenticity, but we can control whether we abandon ourselves to manage their responses. We cannot guarantee that we will never feel empty again, but we can learn to move through emptiness without setting up permanent residence there. This responsibility is not a burden, but a liberation. When we truly understand that we have the power to choose our response to any situation, we stop being victims of our circumstances and become authors of our experience. This does not mean we can control outcomes, but it means we can always choose to show up as ourselves, regardless of how others show up. This authorship of our own experience is perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves and others. When we take full responsibility for our inner life, we stop making others responsible for our happiness, our self-worth, our sense of meaning. This relieves them of an impossible burden and frees them to be themselves rather than having to manage our emotional state. From this place of self-responsibility, we can engage in what I call conscious relationship. Instead of unconsciously reenacting old patterns of emptiness and codependency, we can consciously choose how we want to show up with others. We can practice being fully present instead of automatically absent. We can offer our authentic thoughts and feelings instead of our performed responses. Conscious relationship requires us to stay awake to our own patterns and triggers. When we feel the old emptiness beginning to arise, we can pause and ask, what is happening right now? What am I feeling? What do I need? How can I honor both myself and the other person in this moment? These questions interrupt the automatic pilot that once governed our interactions and create space for conscious choice. This consciousness transforms not only our intimate relationships, but our relationship with work, with creativity, with spirituality, with life itself. We begin to approach everything from presence rather than absence, from fullness rather than emptiness, from authenticity rather than performance. This does not mean we never struggle or doubt or feel uncertain. It means we struggle and doubt and feel uncertain as ourselves rather than as someone we are pretending to be. The journey from emptiness to presence is not a destination, but a practice. Each day offers new opportunities to choose ourselves over our conditioning, to choose presence over performance, to choose truth over convenience. Some days we will choose well, others we will slip back into old patterns. Both are part of the process. What matters is not perfection, but direction. Are we moving toward greater authenticity or away from it? Are we inhabiting ourselves more fully or abandoning ourselves more completely? Are we showing up as who we really are or as who we think we should be? These questions guide us back to ourselves whenever we lose our way. The empty self believed that it had to earn the right to exist through constant achievement and accommodation. But the present self discovers something radical. Existence itself is enough. We do not have to prove our worth through what we do or produce or provide for others. Our worth is inherent in our being, not contingent on our performance. This understanding revolutionizes our relationship with productivity and achievement. We can still work hard and accomplish goals, but from a different motivation. Instead of trying to prove we deserve to exist, we create and contribute because existence is so precious that we want to honor it with our gifts. Instead of working to fill an inner void, we work to express an inner fullness. This shift transforms the quality of everything we create. Art made from emptiness has a hungry, desperate quality. It is trying to fill the artist rather than express them. But art made from presence has a different energy entirely. It is generous, authentic, alive. It touches others not because it is needy, but because it is real. The same principle applies to our service in the world. The empty self serves others in order to feel valuable, worthy, needed. This service, however well-intentioned, carries a subtle demand for recognition and gratitude. But the present self serves from overflow, from the natural expression of a full heart. This service asks for nothing in return because it is already complete in itself. As we traverse deeper into this landscape of inner transformation, we encounter what I have come to understand as the most paradoxical aspect of healing emptiness, the necessity of befriending the void itself. Those who seek to eliminate their emptiness through force, through spiritual bypassing, through endless accumulation of experiences and achievements, often find themselves trapped in an exhausting cycle of temporary relief followed by deeper despair. But there is another way, a path that requires us to turn toward the emptiness with the same curiosity we might bring to meeting a mysterious stranger. What if this void that has haunted us is not our enemy, but our teacher? What if the very thing we have been running from contains the seeds of our liberation? In the depths of therapeutic work, I have witnessed individuals discover that their emptiness was not random suffering, but a highly intelligent response to impossible circumstances. The child who learned to disappear did so because presence was dangerous. The adult who feels hollow did not choose this state capriciously. They were shaped by forces beyond their conscious control, forces that demanded their absence as the price of survival. This understanding brings with it a profound shift in how we relate to our own experience. Instead of pathologizing our emptiness, we begin to honor it as evidence of our psyche's remarkable ability to adapt, to protect, to preserve some essential core of ourselves, even when everything else had to be sacrificed. The emptiness becomes not a flaw to be corrected, but a story to be understood. But understanding alone is not enough. We must also learn to inhabit our experience differently. This requires what I call the development of internal witnessing, the capacity to observe our own psychological processes without being completely consumed by them. The empty person has lived so identified with their void that they cannot see beyond it. But as we develop this witnessing capacity, we begin to recognize that we are larger than our emptiness, that there is something in us that can hold the emptiness without being destroyed by it. This witnessing presence is not detached or cold. It is warm, curious, compassionate. It can look at our patterns of self-abandonment with understanding rather than judgment. It can feel the pain of our exile from ourselves without drowning in despair. It can acknowledge the cost of our adaptations without becoming bitter about what was required of us. From this place of compassionate witnessing, we begin to see that our emptiness has its own intelligence, its own rhythm, its own purpose. There are times when feeling empty serves us, when it creates space for new experiences, when it allows us to rest from the intensity of being fully present, when it reminds us of our need for deeper nourishment. The goal is not to never feel empty again, but to feel empty consciously, by choice, rather than by compulsion. This conscious relationship with emptiness transforms it from a prison into a doorway. When we can be empty without being lost, we discover that emptiness contains infinite potential. It is the pregnant void from which all creativity emerges. It is the open space that allows for genuine encounter with others. It is the fertile darkness from which new aspects of ourselves can be born. But this transformation requires us to develop what might be called spiritual stamina, the ability to stay present with difficult experiences without immediately seeking escape or resolution. The empty person has typically developed sophisticated strategies for avoiding the full weight of their experience. They dissociate, they distract themselves, they lose themselves in others' dramas, they stay perpetually busy. Learning to simply be with whatever is arising without fixing or changing or fleeing becomes a revolutionary practice. This practice of presence reveals something astonishing. Most of our suffering comes not from what we are experiencing, but from our resistance to what we are experiencing. The emptiness itself, when met with acceptance, is often less painful than our fight against it. The void, when entered consciously, reveals itself to be not a pit of despair, but a sacred space of possibility. In the mystical traditions, this void has been recognized as the darkness that precedes all creation, the emptiness that contains all fullness. The medieval mystics spoke of the dark night of the soul, not as pathology, but as initiation. Indigenous traditions honor the void as the place of vision, the darkness from which wisdom emerges. Our emptiness, viewed through this lens, becomes not evidence of our brokenness, but proof of our readiness for transformation. But we must be careful not to romanticize this process. The journey through emptiness is genuinely difficult. It requires us to feel things we have spent years avoiding. It demands that we question beliefs about ourselves and others that have structured our entire lives. It asks us to risk the security of our familiar patterns for the uncertainty of authentic being. There are nights when the emptiness feels like a physical presence, a weight that sits on our chest and makes breathing difficult. There are days when the void seems to mock our efforts at transformation, when every step toward wholeness feels like a step into deeper isolation. There are moments when we wonder if we are losing our minds, if this journey toward authenticity is actually a descent into madness. These dark passages are not signs that we are failing, but evidence that we are finally taking the journey seriously. The psyche does not give up its defenses easily. The patterns that once protected us will not dissolve without a fight. The emptiness will test our commitment to transformation by intensifying before it begins to transform. During these intensifications, we need what I call holding environments, internal and external structures that can contain us while we undergo the dissolution of old patterns and the emergence of new ones. Internally, this might be a meditation practice, a creative outlet, a relationship with the divine. Externally, it might be therapy, spiritual community, trusted friends who can witness our process without trying to fix or change us. These holding environments serve as containers for our becoming. They provide stability while everything else is shifting. They remind us that transformation is possible when we cannot remember why we started this journey. They hold space for our authentic self to emerge when we have forgotten what authenticity even means. But perhaps most importantly, these environments teach us to hold ourselves, to become our own compassionate witness, our own patient parent, our own faithful friend. We learn to speak to ourselves with the kindness we would offer a beloved child going through a difficult time. We practice treating our mistakes as learning opportunities rather than evidence of our unworthiness. We develop the capacity to comfort ourselves without indulging ourselves, to challenge ourselves without attacking ourselves. This internal holding allows us to stay present with our experience even when it becomes overwhelming. Instead of abandoning ourselves when things get difficult, we learn to move closer to ourselves, to wrap ourselves in understanding rather than criticism. We discover that we can survive our own feelings, that we can weather our own storms, that we can hold our own contradictions without falling apart. As this capacity for self-holding develops, something remarkable happens. We begin to trust ourselves. Not the superficial trust of positive thinking, but the deep trust that comes from having witnessed our own resilience, our own capacity to survive and transform difficulties. We learn that we can make mistakes without being destroyed by them, that we can feel pain without being consumed by it, that we can face uncertainty without losing ourselves in it. This self-trust becomes the foundation for authentic relationship with others. When we trust ourselves to handle whatever arises, we can allow others to be themselves without needing them to be different for our comfort. When we know we can take care of our own emotional needs, we can engage with others from choice rather than desperation. When we have confidence in our own perceptions, we can listen to others' viewpoints without losing our own. But self-trust also requires us to honor our own boundaries and limits. The empty person has often survived by having no boundaries, by being available for whatever others needed, regardless of the cost to themselves. Learning to say no, to protect our energy, to choose how we engage rather than automatically adapting, becomes an essential skill for maintaining our newfound sense of self. This boundary setting is not selfish but necessary. It is how we preserve the energy required for our own growth and healing. It is how we maintain the integrity of our authentic self in a world that often demands conformity. It is how we model for others that they too have the right to exist as themselves rather than as reflections of what others need them to be. The development of healthy boundaries reveals something profound about the nature of connection itself. The empty person believed that connection required dissolution, that love meant losing oneself in the other. But authentic connection actually requires two whole people meeting each other across the space of their distinctness. When we have clear boundaries, we can be truly intimate because we are not afraid of losing ourselves in the other person. This intimacy has a quality that the empty person never experienced. It is nourishing rather than depleting. Instead of leaving us feeling drained and confused, genuine connection leaves us feeling more ourselves than we were before. We discover that we can love others without losing ourselves, that we can be loved without having to disappear to make room for the other person's needs. But perhaps the most surprising discovery in this journey is that as we become more ourselves, we also become more universal. The things that make us unique, our particular way of seeing, feeling, responding to life, turn out to be doorways into the shared human experience. When we stop trying to be like everyone else, we discover that we are more connected to everyone else than we ever imagined possible. This paradox resolves the great fear of the empty person, that being authentic will lead to isolation. In fact, the opposite is true. It is only when we are fully ourselves that we can truly meet others, that we can offer something real to the world, that we can participate in the great conversation of human consciousness. Our emptiness was the thing that isolated us. Our fullness is what connects us to the larger web of being. The journey from emptiness to presence is ultimately a journey from exile to homecoming. But the home we return to is not the one we left. It is a home we create through the courageous act of being ourselves in a world that has taught us to be someone else. It is a home built from the materials of our own experience, furnished with our own preferences, decorated with our own dreams. This home within ourselves becomes a sanctuary that we can carry anywhere. No matter what external circumstances we face, we always have access to this inner refuge where we can remember who we are, where we can reconnect with our own truth, where we can draw from our own well of strength and wisdom. From this internal home, we can venture into the world with confidence and curiosity. We can engage with others without losing ourselves, work toward goals without sacrificing our well-being, face challenges without abandoning our integrity. We can be fully present to life because we are finally fully present to ourselves. But this presence is not static. It is dynamic, evolving, responsive to the changing circumstances of our lives. We continue to grow, to learn, to discover new aspects of ourselves. The difference is that now we grow from fullness rather than emptiness, from presence rather than absence, from love rather than fear. The empty self was always becoming something else, always trying to transform into whatever would be acceptable, lovable, worthy. But the present self is always becoming more itself, always deepening into its own truth, always expanding into greater authenticity. This is not narcissism, but its opposite, the humble recognition that our authentic self is our greatest gift to the world. In my years of witnessing this transformation in others and living it myself, I have come to understand that the healing of emptiness is not just a personal journey, but a collective necessity. We live in a world that is starving for authenticity, for real connection, for people who are willing to show up as themselves rather than as carefully crafted personas. Every person who makes the journey from emptiness to presence contributes to the healing of our shared human condition. This understanding brings with it a sense of purpose that transcends personal healing. We do this work not just for ourselves, but for all those who will come after us, for all those who are still trapped in the exile of emptiness, for the future of human consciousness itself. We become links in a chain of awakening that extends backward to our ancestors and forward to generations yet to come. The empty person felt like a burden on the world, a drain on others' resources, a mistake that needed to be corrected or hidden. But the present person discovers that they are a gift, not because they are perfect or special, but because they are real. In a world full of masks and performances, authenticity is revolutionary. In a culture that profits from our disconnection from ourselves, presence is radical. In a time when many feel isolated and alone, genuine connection is healing. This gift is not something we have to earn or achieve. It is something we already are, waiting to be unwrapped through the patient work of self-discovery and self-acceptance. The journey from emptiness to presence is ultimately a journey home to this gift, to this truth, to this irreplaceable contribution that only we can make to the grand symphony of human experience. As we learn to inhabit ourselves fully, we inspire others to do the same. As we refuse to abandon ourselves for the comfort of others, we give others permission to stop abandoning themselves. As we insist on showing up authentically, even when it is inconvenient, we create space for others to be real as well. This is how individual healing becomes collective transformation. This is how personal awakening contributes to the evolution of consciousness itself. This is how the journey from emptiness to presence becomes not just a path to personal fulfillment, but a form of service to the world. The work is not easy, and it is never finished. There will always be moments when we feel the pull of emptiness, when we are tempted to disappear rather than deal with the complexity of being fully present. But each time we choose presence over absence, authenticity over performance, truth over convenience, we strengthen not only ourselves, but the entire network of consciousness of which we are part. This is the profound responsibility and privilege of being human, to transform our suffering into wisdom, our emptiness into presence, our exile into homecoming. Not just for ourselves, but for all of life. In doing so, we fulfill our deepest purpose and contribute to the healing of a world that desperately needs people who are willing to be real. The journey continues, and with each step, we discover that we are not walking alone. We are part of an invisible community of seekers, all finding their way home to themselves, all contributing to the great work of human awakening. In our individual healing, we participate in something far larger than ourselves. In our personal transformation, we serve the transformation of all. The path we have traced thus far reveals only the threshold of a deeper mystery. For as we learn to inhabit ourselves more fully, we encounter something that the empty person could never have imagined. The discovery that our individual healing is inseparable from something far more ancient and collective. We begin to sense that our personal emptiness was never truly personal at all, but rather a manifestation of wounds that stretch back through generations, through cultures, through the very fabric of human consciousness itself. In the deepest work of reclaiming ourselves, We often find that we are not just healing our own exile, but participating in the healing of what I have come to call the collective void. That shared emptiness that haunts our species, that drives our endless consumption, our desperate seeking, our perpetual dissatisfaction with simply being alive. Our individual journey becomes a thread in a much larger tapestry of awakening. This recognition brings with it both terror and tremendous responsibility. Terror because we realize that our emptiness connects us to the suffering of countless others, that our healing matters not just to us, but to the entire web of consciousness of which we are part. Responsibility because we understand that every moment we choose presence over absence, we strengthen something essential in the human soul. But we must be careful not to overwhelm ourselves with the magnitude of this calling. The work remains fundamentally intimate, fundamentally personal. We cannot heal the collective void directly. We can only tend to our own corner of it with such dedication and precision that our healing ripples outward in ways we may never fully comprehend. This tending requires us to develop what I call archetypal awareness, the ability to recognize when we are being moved not just by personal psychology, but by forces far older and larger than our individual story. The empty person is often unconsciously possessed by archetypal patterns. The eternal child who never learned to exist independently, the sacrificial victim who believes love requires self-destruction, the ghost who haunts the edges of life without ever fully entering it. These archetypal patterns operate below the threshold of ordinary consciousness, shaping our choices and responses in ways we rarely recognize. The person who compulsively rescues others may be gripped by the wounded healer archetype. The one who cannot tolerate being seen may be possessed by the invisible servant. The individual who feels perpetually misunderstood may be caught in the web of the eternal outsider. To heal our emptiness, we must learn to dialogue with these archetypal forces rather than being unconsciously driven by them. This requires a kind of inner diplomacy, the ability to recognize when an archetype has taken possession of our psyche and to negotiate with it consciously rather than being swept away by its agenda. I recall working with a woman who had spent her entire adult life in service to others, always available, always accommodating, always exhausting herself in the attempt to meet everyone else's needs. She experienced this as her natural temperament, her spiritual calling, her expression of love. But in our work together, we began to recognize that she was not choosing service. She was being driven by the archetype of the eternal mother, compelled to nurture and protect everyone around her regardless of the cost to her own well-being. This recognition was initially devastating for her. If her constant giving was not her authentic self, then who was she? What was left when she stopped being the one everyone could count on? But as she learned to separate herself from the archetypal possession, something remarkable emerged. She discovered that she could choose when and how to serve, that her nurturing could come from fullness rather than compulsion, that saying no to some requests allowed her to say yes more meaningfully to others. This process of archetypal differentiation is essential for anyone seeking to transform emptiness into presence. We must learn to distinguish between what is genuinely ours and what belongs to the larger patterns that move through human consciousness. We must develop the capacity to be moved by these patterns without being consumed by them, to dance with them without losing ourselves in their rhythm. But this differentiation is not about rejection or resistance. The archetypes are not enemies to be defeated, but forces to be understood and integrated. They carry wisdom that spans millennia, insights that connect us to the deepest truths of human existence. The wounded healer archetype, for instance, holds the knowledge that our greatest gifts often emerge from our deepest wounds. The invisible servant carries the understanding that true power sometimes operates through apparent powerlessness. The key is consciousness, learning to work with these forces deliberately, rather than being unconsciously driven by them. When we can recognize an archetypal pattern arising within us, we can choose how to respond, rather than being automatically compelled. We can honor the wisdom the archetype carries while maintaining our own autonomy and discernment. This conscious relationship with archetypal forces transforms our understanding of what it means to be an individual. We are not isolated units, struggling alone with our personal problems. We are nodes in a vast network of consciousness, points where universal patterns intersect with particular circumstances. Our individual healing participates in the healing of these larger patterns, and our personal awakening contributes to the evolution of the archetypal realm itself. This understanding brings a profound shift in how we relate to our struggles. The emptiness we have carried is not just our private burden, but our participation in a collective wound that seeks healing through us. We are not victims of this wound, but its potential healers, called to transform it through the alchemy of our own consciousness. But this alchemical work requires something the empty person has rarely developed: the capacity to hold paradox. We must learn to be simultaneously individual and universal, personal and transpersonal, unique and archetypal. We must embrace the mystery that we are both the healers and the wounded, both the servants and the served, both the seekers and the sought. This paradoxical awareness dissolves the rigid boundaries that the empty person constructed to survive. Where once there were walls between self and other, between inner and outer, between personal and collective, now there are permeable membranes that allow for connection without dissolution. We learn to be intimately ourselves while recognizing our fundamental interconnectedness with all of life. In the therapeutic work, I have observed that this capacity for paradox often emerges through what might be called liminal experiences, moments when the ordinary boundaries of consciousness become fluid. These might arise through dreams, through meditation, through creative expression, through encounters with nature, through profound grief or joy. In these liminal spaces, we glimpse the truth that our individual consciousness is both separate and inseparable from the larger consciousness that moves through all things. These experiences can be disorienting for the person who has built their identity around solid boundaries and clear categories, but they are essential for healing emptiness because they reveal the truth that our isolation was always an illusion. We were never actually separate from the source of life. We only believed we were. Our emptiness was not evidence of our disconnection, but of our forgetting of our fundamental belonging. This remembering of our belonging transforms the entire landscape of our inner life. Where once there was the terror of abandonment, now there is the recognition that we cannot actually be abandoned because we are part of the very fabric of existence itself. Where once there was the desperate need to prove our worth, now there is the understanding that our worth is inherent in our being, not contingent on our achievements or others' approval. But this transformation does not happen overnight. It unfolds gradually through countless small moments of choosing connection over separation, presence over absence, truth over convenience. Each time we resist the pull to disappear, each time we stay present with our experience rather than fleeing from it, each time we choose to show up authentically, despite our fear, we strengthen our capacity to remember our fundamental belonging. This strengthening happens not just in our minds but in our bodies. The empty person has often lived in a state of chronic disconnection from their physical experience, treating their body as an inconvenient vessel for their thoughts and emotions rather than as a source of wisdom and guidance. Learning to inhabit our bodies fully becomes an essential part of healing emptiness. Our bodies hold the memory of every moment we chose to disappear rather than deal with difficult feelings. They carry the tension of years of self-abandonment, the collapse of a nervous system that learned to shut down rather than stay present. But they also hold the potential for our return to ourselves, the capacity to feel and respond and be fully alive in each moment. Reclaiming our embodied presence requires patience and gentleness. We must learn to listen to the subtle signals our bodies send us, to honor our physical needs and limits, to trust the wisdom that speaks through sensation and movement. We must practice being present to physical pleasure as well as physical pain, learning to receive the gifts of embodied existence rather than merely enduring them. This embodied presence transforms our relationship with emptiness itself. Instead of experiencing it as an abstract psychological state, we begin to feel it as a specific pattern of tension and numbness in our bodies. We can sense when we are beginning to disconnect, when we are starting to abandon ourselves, when we are slipping back into old patterns of absence. This somatic awareness gives us new tools for staying present. When we feel the familiar pull toward emptiness, we can breathe more deeply, feel our feet on the ground, attend to the sensations in our bodies. We can use our physical experience as an anchor that holds us in the present moment rather than allowing us to drift into the dissociated state that once felt like safety. But embodied presence also opens us to experiences that the empty person never allowed themselves to have. We begin to feel the full spectrum of human emotion, not just the safe, socially acceptable feelings, but the raw, primal responses that connect us to our animal nature and our deepest wisdom. We learn to feel our anger without becoming destructive, our sadness without drowning, our joy without guilt. This emotional authenticity creates what I call energetic integrity, a state in which our inner experience matches our outer expression, in which we are the same person alone as we are with others. The empty person lived in constant energetic fragmentation, presenting different versions of themselves to different people, never quite sure which version was real. But energetic integrity allows us to show up as ourselves regardless of the context. We may express ourselves differently in different situations, but the core self remains consistent. We no longer have to remember which mask we were wearing or which story we were telling. We can simply be ourselves, and this simplicity is profoundly liberating. This liberation extends to our relationship with creativity and self-expression. The empty person often believed they had nothing unique to offer, no authentic voice worth hearing. But as we reclaim our inner landscape, we discover that we each carry a perspective that has never existed before and will never exist again. Our particular way of seeing, feeling, and responding to life is not just personal preference, but a unique contribution to the collective understanding of what it means to be human. This creative expression becomes not just a hobby or career choice, but a form of spiritual practice, a way of honoring the life force that moves through us. Whether through art, writing, music, movement, conversation, or simply the way we live our daily lives, we begin to express the truth of who we are in ways that feed our souls and serve the world. But this creative authenticity requires us to face one of the deepest fears of the empty person, the fear of being truly seen. When we create from our authentic self, we reveal aspects of our inner world that cannot be hidden or controlled. We become vulnerable to judgment, rejection, misunderstanding. The empty person learned long ago that visibility was dangerous, that it was safer to remain in the shadows than to risk exposure. Learning to be seen without losing ourselves requires tremendous courage and practice. We must develop what I call transparent strength, the ability to be vulnerable without being weak, open without being defenseless, authentic without being naive. This is not the brittle transparency of having no boundaries, but the mature transparency of choosing when and how to reveal ourselves. This capacity for conscious visibility transforms our relationships at every level. We can be intimate without losing ourselves, professional without wearing masks, social without performing. We discover that being seen for who we truly are is not dangerous but nourishing, not threatening but connecting, not shameful but sacred. As this transparency develops, we often find that our relationships naturally sort themselves into new patterns. Some people in our lives are drawn to our increasing authenticity and respond by becoming more authentic themselves. Others may feel uncomfortable with our refusal to play old roles and may distance themselves from us. This sorting process can be painful, but it is also clarifying. We discover who is truly interested in knowing us versus who was only interested in what we could do for them. The relationships that survive and deepen through our transformation often become laboratories for conscious connection. We learn to navigate conflict without abandoning ourselves, to support others without sacrificing our own needs, to love without losing our boundaries. We discover that healthy relationships actually require two whole people choosing to share their lives rather than two half people trying to complete each other. But perhaps most importantly, we learn to have a conscious relationship with ourselves. We become our own best friend, our most trusted advisor, our most compassionate witness. We learn to enjoy our own company, to trust our own instincts, to celebrate our own growth. We discover that the relationship we have with ourselves sets the template for all our other relationships. This self-relationship requires ongoing attention and cultivation. We must learn to speak to ourselves with kindness rather than criticism, to encourage ourselves through difficulties rather than attacking ourselves for having them, to celebrate our progress rather than focusing only on what still needs work. We must become the parent we needed, the friend we always wanted, the lover who sees and accepts us completely. This internal relationship provides the foundation for what I call sustainable presence, the ability to remain connected to ourselves even under stress, pressure, or challenge. The empty person collapsed under pressure because they had no internal resources to draw upon. But sustainable presence gives us access to an inner well of strength, wisdom, and resilience that cannot be depleted by external circumstances. This inner resource is not something we create, but something we uncover. It has always been there, waiting beneath the layers of conditioning and adaptation and fear. It is our essential nature, our true self, the part of us that existed before we learned to be someone else and will continue to exist long after our personas have dissolved. Connecting with this essential nature brings what many describe as a profound sense of coming home, not to a place or a person or a set of circumstances, but to ourselves. We recognize this self not as something new, but as something eternally familiar, something we have been seeking without realizing we already possessed it. This homecoming is not sentimental or comfortable in the way we might expect. It is often accompanied by grief for all the years spent in exile, by anger at the forces that convinced us we had to abandon ourselves, by fear of what it means to live from such authenticity. But beneath these difficult emotions is an unshakable sense of rightness, of finally being where we belong. From this place of belonging to ourselves, we can engage with the world from a completely different foundation. We no longer need others to complete us because we are already whole. We no longer need external validation because we can validate ourselves. We no longer need to prove our worth because we know our worth is inherent. This shift from neediness to wholeness transforms every interaction we have. We can offer our gifts without attachment to how they are received. We can love others without trying to possess them. We can engage with challenges without being destroyed by them. We can participate fully in life while maintaining our essential autonomy. But this autonomy is not isolation. It is the foundation for true connection. When we are whole within ourselves, we can meet others from our wholeness rather than our wounds. We can see them clearly rather than projecting our unmet needs onto them. We can love them for who they are rather than for who we need them to be. This quality of love is something the empty person never experienced. It is not the desperate clinging of codependency or the conditional approval of performance-based relationships. It is the spacious, accepting presence that allows others to be themselves while maintaining our own integrity. It is love that enhances rather than diminishes, that empowers rather than enslaves, that serves rather than uses. Living from this place of wholeness does not mean we never feel empty again. Emptiness may still arise, but it no longer defines us. We can feel empty without being empty, experience the void without losing ourselves in it. We understand that emptiness, like all emotions, is a temporary visitor rather than a permanent resident. This relationship with our inner experience, seeing all feelings as weather patterns moving through the sky of our consciousness, allows us to remain stable even when our inner climate is turbulent. We learn to be the sky that can hold any weather rather than being tossed about by every emotional storm. This stability is not rigidity, but flexibility, the flexibility of something rooted deeply enough to bend without breaking. We can adapt to changing circumstances without losing our core identity. We can grow and evolve without abandoning our essential nature. We can respond to life's demands without betraying our deepest values. From this rooted flexibility, we begin to see that our journey through emptiness was not a mistake or failure, but an essential part of our development. We could not have arrived at this wholeness without first experiencing its absence. We could not have learned to choose ourselves without first experiencing the cost of abandoning ourselves. We could not have developed authentic presence without first knowing the hollow ache of absence. This understanding transforms our relationship with our past. Instead of seeing our history of emptiness as something to overcome or transcend, we begin to see it as the very foundation of our wisdom. Our wounds become our teachers, our struggles become our strength, our emptiness becomes the space from which our fullness emerges. This alchemical perspective, the ability to transform lead into gold, suffering into wisdom, emptiness into presence, becomes one of the greatest gifts we can offer the world. We become living proof that transformation is possible, that no wound is too deep to heal, that no emptiness is too vast to fill with authentic presence. But this proof is not offered through preaching or teaching, but simply through being. When we show up as ourselves, when we live from our truth, when we demonstrate that it is possible to be both fully human and fully authentic, we give others permission to do the same. Our healing becomes an invitation for their healing. Our wholeness becomes a possibility they can consider for themselves. This is how individual transformation becomes collective healing. This is how personal awakening contributes to the evolution of human consciousness. This is how the journey from emptiness to presence becomes a gift not just to ourselves, but to all of life. The work continues, and it will continue for as long as we are alive. There will always be new layers to explore, new aspects of ourselves to reclaim, new ways to deepen our presence and authenticity. But now we do this work from a place of curiosity rather than desperation, from wholeness rather than emptiness, from love rather than fear. We have learned that we are both the journey and the destination, both the question and the answer, both the seeker and the sought. In reclaiming ourselves, we have reclaimed our place in the great mystery of existence. In healing our emptiness, we have touched something eternal and unbreakable within ourselves. And from this touching, this recognition, this remembering of who we have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and fear, we can finally offer ourselves to life not as empty vessels waiting to be filled, but as full participants in the grand experiment of consciousness exploring itself through the unique lens of our individual existence. The emptiness that once haunted us has become the very space from which our most authentic self emerges. The void we once feared has become the fertile darkness from which our truest contributions to the world are born. The absence we once struggled to fill has become the presence that is our greatest gift to ourselves and to all those whose lives we touch. This is the mystery and the miracle of the human journey, that our greatest wounds can become our deepest wisdom, that our most painful struggles can become our most powerful strengths, that our emptiest moments can give birth to our most authentic presence. In walking this path from emptiness to fullness, we do not just heal ourselves, we participate in the healing of the world. This transformation from emptiness to presence carries with it a peculiar responsibility that few who embark upon this journey anticipate. For as we learn to inhabit ourselves fully, we discover that our individual awakening creates ripples that extend far beyond the boundaries of our personal experience. We become what I have come to call carriers of consciousness, individuals whose very presence invites others to remember what they too have forgotten about themselves. But this role is not one we can assume through effort or intention. It emerges naturally from the depth of our own integration, from the degree to which we have learned to be genuinely ourselves in a world that rewards pretense. When we no longer perform our lives but simply live them, we become a kind of permission for others to do the same. Our authenticity becomes a mirror in which others can glimpse their own abandoned selves. Yet this mirroring function comes with its own shadows. There is a temptation, particularly for those who have travelled far from their original emptiness, to become identified with the role of awakener, to mistake their personal healing for spiritual authority. The very gifts that emerged from our journey through the void can become new forms of ego inflation if we are not vigilant about our motivations. I have witnessed individuals who, having touched something authentic within themselves, immediately begin trying to lead others towards similar discoveries. They forget that their own journey was necessarily solitary, that their healing came through facing their own unique constellation of wounds and patterns. They begin to prescribe their path as the path, forgetting that consciousness expresses itself through infinite variations. This spiritual materialism, the unconscious use of awakening as a new form of identity, can be particularly seductive for those who have lived with emptiness. Having spent years feeling like nothing, the experience of finally feeling like something significant can create its own form of addiction. We may find ourselves subtly performing our authenticity, showcasing our depth, using our transformation as a way to feel special or important. But true healing moves in the opposite direction. The more genuinely we integrate our journey from emptiness to presence, the more ordinary we become, not in the sense of losing our uniqueness, but in the sense of recognizing our fundamental humanity. We discover that our struggles were not special, that our emptiness was not unique, that our healing is not evidence of our superiority, but of our willingness to do the work that any conscious being must eventually undertake. This ordinariness is profoundly liberating. It frees us from the burden of having to be remarkable, from the exhaustion of constantly proving our worth through our depth or insight or transformation. We can simply be human beings doing the daily work of staying present to ourselves and showing up authentically in our relationships and responsibilities. From this grounded ordinariness, our influence becomes more subtle but far more powerful. We no longer need to announce our authenticity. It speaks through the quality of our attention, the consistency of our presence, the way we hold space for others without needing to fix or change them. We become what the world desperately needs: people who are simply, genuinely themselves. But maintaining this authenticity in a world that often rewards performance requires constant vigilance. The forces that originally created our emptiness do not disappear simply because we have healed. They continue to operate in the systems and relationships around us, constantly inviting us to abandon ourselves for the promise of acceptance, success, or security. The difference now is that we can recognize these invitations for what they are. When someone asks us to be smaller so they can feel bigger, we can feel the familiar tug towards self-abandonment and choose differently. When a situation demands that we perform rather than simply be present, we can notice the old pattern arising and respond from our authentic center rather than our adaptive mechanisms. This recognition requires what I call conscious resistance, not the reactive rebellion of adolescence, but the mature refusal to betray ourselves for others' comfort. This resistance is often subtle, expressed more through what we choose not to do than through dramatic confrontations. We simply stop participating in conversations that require us to gossip or diminish others. We quietly withdraw our energy from systems that profit from our disconnection from ourselves. We politely decline invitations to perform versions of ourselves that no longer feel genuine. This withdrawal of participation is not passive aggression, but conscious choice. We are choosing to invest our life force only in ways that honor our authentic nature and contribute to our continued growth and integration. We are learning to be what I call consciously selfish, not in the narcissistic sense of disregarding others, but in the healthy sense of consistently choosing what serves our highest development. This conscious selfishness often confuses others, particularly those who benefited from our previous patterns of self-abandonment. They may interpret our boundaries as rejection, our authenticity as selfishness, our refusal to play old roles as evidence that we have become difficult or demanding. Their discomfort with our changes can trigger our own fear of abandonment, our old belief that we must choose between being ourselves and being loved. But this is precisely the test that confirms whether our healing is genuine. Can we maintain our authentic presence even when others are uncomfortable with it? Can we continue to choose ourselves even when that choice disappoints people we care about? Can we trust that the relationships meant for us will appreciate our authenticity while allowing others to fall away without taking their departure as evidence of our unworthiness? This test is not administered once, but continuously throughout our lives. Each day presents new opportunities to either honor our authentic self or abandon it for temporary peace, acceptance, or advantage. The path of presence is not a destination we reach, but a choice we make moment by moment, interaction by interaction, decision by decision. What sustains us through these ongoing choices is the development of what I call existential faith. Not faith in any particular belief system or outcome, but faith in the process of being authentically ourselves regardless of external circumstances. This faith emerges from the lived experience of discovering that we can survive our own truth, that we can handle whatever responses our authenticity provokes, that we are more resilient and resourceful than we previously imagined. This existential faith allows us to engage with uncertainty without collapsing into anxiety, to face conflict without immediately seeking resolution, to encounter disapproval without automatically adjusting our behavior. We learn to trust the intelligence of our authentic responses, even when we cannot predict where they will lead us. But perhaps most importantly, this faith teaches us to distinguish between aloneness and loneliness. The empty person experienced any separation from others as abandonment, as evidence of their fundamental unworthiness. But the present person can be alone without feeling lonely because they have learned to be good company for themselves. This capacity for solitude becomes one of our greatest strengths. When we are not afraid of being alone, we cannot be manipulated through threats of abandonment. When we enjoy our own company, we do not settle for relationships that diminish us. When we can find fulfillment in our own presence, we engage with others from choice rather than desperation. From this place of chosen connection rather than compulsive attachment, we discover what authentic intimacy actually feels like. Instead of the anxious merging that the empty person mistook for love, we experience the spacious closeness of two whole beings choosing to share their inner worlds. Instead of the exhausting work of constantly managing others' emotions, we find the restful joy of being with people who can hold their own emotional experience. This quality of relationship, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, has a sustainability that codependent connections lack. Because it is based on mutual authenticity rather than mutual need, it can weather the inevitable changes and challenges that arise in any long-term connection. We can grow and evolve without threatening the relationship, disagree without destroying the bond, need space without creating crisis. But developing this capacity for authentic relationship often requires us to grieve the relationships that were built on our emptiness. We may discover that some of the connections we thought were deep were actually quite shallow, based more on our willingness to disappear than on genuine mutual appreciation. Some people may prefer the empty version of us because it was more convenient, more predictable, more manageable. This grief is necessary and healthy. We must mourn what we thought we had in order to make space for what is actually possible. We must release the fantasy of being loved for our performance in order to discover what it feels like to be appreciated for our authentic presence. This is not loss but transformation, the trading of quantity for quality, convenience for truth, familiarity for genuine intimacy. As we navigate these relationship transitions, we often discover that our capacity for empathy has been refined rather than diminished. Where once we absorbed others' emotions indiscriminately, now we can feel with others without losing ourselves in their experience. Where once we compulsively tried to fix everyone's problems, now we can offer presence without taking responsibility for outcomes we cannot control. This mature empathy is far more helpful to others than our previous emotional enmeshment. When we can remain centered in our own experience while witnessing theirs, we provide a stable reference point that actually supports their own growth and healing. When we stop rushing in to rescue them from their difficulties, we allow them to develop their own strength and resilience. But this shift from rescuing to witnessing can feel uncomfortable at first, particularly for those of us who built our identity around being helpful. We may worry that we are becoming cold or uncaring when we stop automatically absorbing others' distress. We may feel guilty when we allow people to struggle without immediately intervening. Learning to distinguish between compassionate presence and compulsive helping requires us to examine our motivations honestly. Are we offering support because it genuinely serves the other person, or because we need to feel needed? Are we responding to their actual request for help, or to our own anxiety about their situation? Are we honoring their capacity to handle their own challenges, or are we unconsciously treating them as incapable? These questions help us develop what I call conscious compassion, empathy that serves rather than enslaves, care that empowers rather than diminishes, love that honors rather than controls. This conscious compassion recognizes that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to trust others to find their own way through their difficulties. This trust extends to our relationship with life itself. The empty person lived in constant fear that life would overwhelm them, that they lacked the resources to handle whatever challenges might arise. But the journey from emptiness to presence teaches us that we are far more capable than we imagined, that we have inner resources we never knew existed, that we can not only survive but thrive through experiences that once would have destroyed us. This discovery of our own resilience creates what I call existential confidence, not the brittle confidence of denial or positive thinking, but the quiet confidence that comes from having tested ourselves in the crucible of authentic living and discovered that we are stronger than our fears suggested. This existential confidence allows us to take risks that the empty person never could have contemplated. We can speak our truth even when it might be poorly received. We can pursue our authentic interests even when they seem impractical or unusual. We can make choices based on our inner guidance even when they contradict conventional wisdom or others' expectations. But this confidence is tempered by humility. We have learned that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to be vulnerable consciously rather than unconsciously. We understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act authentically despite our fears. We recognize that wisdom is not having all the answers, but being comfortable with not knowing while remaining open to discovery. This integration of confidence and humility creates what might be called mature authenticity, the ability to be genuinely ourselves without needing to prove anything to anyone, including ourselves. We can express our truth without insisting that others agree with it. We can share our experience without demanding that others validate it. We can be vulnerable without expecting others to take care of us. This mature authenticity has a quality that both attracts and sometimes disturbs others. It attracts those who are ready for genuine connection, who are tired of surface interactions and performative relationships. But it can disturb those who are still invested in maintaining facades, who experience our authenticity as an implicit challenge to their own patterns of self-concealment. Learning to navigate these varied responses without adjusting our authenticity to manage others' comfort becomes an ongoing practice. We must develop the capacity to remain genuinely ourselves while allowing others to have whatever reaction they need to have. This is not indifference but detachment, the ability to care without being controlled by our caring. This detached caring extends to our relationship with outcomes. The empty person was constantly trying to control results, to ensure that their efforts would be appreciated, their contributions acknowledged, their sacrifices recognized. But presence teaches us to invest fully in our actions while releasing attachment to specific results. This release is not apathy, but freedom. The freedom to give our best without being diminished if our efforts are not received as we hoped. The freedom to love without being destroyed if that love is not returned. The freedom to create without being crushed if our creations are not celebrated. From this freedom, our actions become expressions of our authentic nature rather than strategies for getting needs met. We work because we find meaning in contribution, not because we need recognition. We love because love is our natural expression, not because we expect it to be reciprocated. We create because creativity is how our soul speaks, not because we need external validation. This intrinsic motivation transforms the quality of everything we do. Our work becomes more innovative because we are not constrained by others' expectations. Our relationships become more intimate because we are not performing for approval. Our creative expressions become more original because they emerge from our unique perspective rather than from what we think will be popular or acceptable. But perhaps most significantly, this shift from external to internal motivation allows us to discover our authentic purpose, not the purpose we think we should have or the one others expect us to have, but the one that emerges naturally from who we truly are. This purpose is not usually grand or dramatic. It is often surprisingly simple and ordinary, expressed through how we show up in our daily lives rather than through any particular achievement or accomplishment. Some find their purpose in raising children with conscious presence. Others discover it in bringing authentic connection to their workplace relationships. Some express it through creative endeavors that may never gain public recognition. Others live it through the quality of attention they bring to seemingly mundane activities. The commonality is not the external form, but the internal quality, the sense of alignment between who we are and how we are living, the experience of our daily choices flowing from our authentic center rather than from external pressure or expectation. This alignment creates what I call existential satisfaction, a deep contentment that is not dependent on circumstances but emerges from the simple fact of being genuinely ourselves in whatever situation we find ourselves. This existential satisfaction is perhaps the greatest gift of the journey from emptiness to presence. It is the prize that makes all the difficulty of the transformation worthwhile, the treasure that validates every moment of courage it took to choose authenticity over convenience. It is the proof that we are living the life we were actually meant to live rather than the one we thought we were supposed to live. But this satisfaction does not mean the end of growth or challenge. If anything, it creates the foundation for even deeper exploration of what it means to be fully human. When we are no longer consumed with the basic work of learning to exist authentically, we can turn our attention to more subtle questions. How can we serve the evolution of consciousness itself? What is our unique contribution to the great conversation of human understanding? How can we use our individual healing to contribute to the healing of our species? These questions arise not from ego or ambition, but from the natural overflow of a life that has found its authentic expression. When we are full of ourselves, in the best sense of being completely inhabited by our own presence, we naturally want to share that fullness with the world. Not because we need to be seen or appreciated, but because fullness naturally gives of itself. This giving has a quality that is entirely different from the compulsive service of the empty person. It is effortless rather than effortful, sustainable rather than depleting, joyful rather than dutiful. It emerges from our abundance rather than our need, serves others' authentic development rather than their comfort, contributes to genuine transformation rather than temporary relief. The journey from emptiness to presence thus reveals itself to be not just a personal healing, but a preparation for conscious service. Not service driven by guilt or obligation, but service that flows naturally from the recognition that our individual well-being is inseparable from the well-being of the whole. We serve not because we should, but because we cannot help but contribute when we are living from our authentic center. This understanding completes a circle that began with our original emptiness. What once felt like evidence of our separation from life reveals itself to have been preparation for deeper connection. What seemed like personal pathology turns out to have been part of a larger intelligence that knew we needed to empty ourselves of everything false in order to discover what was genuinely true about who we are. The emptiness that once haunted us becomes the very spaciousness from which our most authentic contributions emerge. The void we feared becomes the creative darkness from which new possibilities are born. The absence we struggled to fill transforms into the presence that is our gift to the world. In this transformation, we discover that we were never actually empty. We were full of everything we had rejected about ourselves, full of potential we had never allowed ourselves to explore, full of gifts we had never learned to recognize or share. Our emptiness was not the absence of something essential, but the presence of everything we needed to reclaim in order to become who we truly are. This recognition brings the journey full circle, but at a higher level of integration. We return to ourselves, but as conscious choosers rather than unconscious reactors. We engage with the world, but from authenticity rather than adaptation. We form relationships, but from wholeness rather than neediness. We contribute to life, but from overflow rather than depletion. The path continues, for consciousness is always evolving, always discovering new depths of its own nature through the unique lens of each individual existence. But now we walk this path not as empty seekers desperately trying to find ourselves, but as present beings consciously exploring what it means to be fully human in an infinite universe that expresses itself through our particular way of seeing, feeling, and being. Our journey from emptiness to presence becomes a gift not only to ourselves but to all of life. Proof that transformation is possible, that no void is too deep to be filled with authentic presence, that every human being carries within themselves the capacity to discover who they truly are beneath the layers of conditioning and fear. In learning to inhabit ourselves fully, we participate in the great work of consciousness awakening to itself through human experience. Our individual healing contributes to the collective evolution. Our personal authenticity serves the transformation of our species. Our journey from emptiness to presence becomes a thread in the vast tapestry of life, coming to know itself more completely through each of us who has the courage to be genuine. The work is never finished, but it is always beginning. Each moment offers a new opportunity to choose presence over absence, authenticity over performance, truth over convenience. In making these choices consistently, we become living demonstrations that it is possible to be both fully human and fully awake, both deeply individual and profoundly connected to the source of all existence. This is the ultimate meaning of our journey through emptiness, not to escape the human condition, but to inhabit it so fully that we transform it from within, creating new possibilities for what it means to be alive, conscious, and authentic in a world that desperately needs people who are willing to show up as themselves rather than as carefully crafted versions of what they think others want them to be. The empty space that once defined our existence becomes not the end of our story, but its most profound beginning. For in this final recognition that we have always been whole beneath our wound, always been present beneath our performance, always been authentic beneath our adaptations, we encounter something that transforms not just our understanding of ourselves, but our relationship to existence itself. There comes a moment in this journey when we realize that our individual healing has prepared us for something far more mysterious than personal satisfaction. We begin to sense that consciousness itself has been using our particular configuration of wounds and gifts, our specific journey through emptiness and back to presence, as a way of exploring its own infinite nature through the unique lens of our existence. This recognition arrives not as intellectual understanding, but as lived experience. A sudden knowing that our struggles were never random, that our emptiness served a purpose larger than our personal story, that our return to authenticity participates in something vast and sacred that extends far beyond the boundaries of our individual life. But this cosmic perspective does not diminish the intimacy of our experience. Instead, it reveals that the most personal is simultaneously the most universal, that our deepest individual truth connects us to the deepest truth of existence itself. The more genuinely ourselves we become, the more we discover that we are expressions of something infinite, exploring itself through the temporary form of our particular humanity. This paradox resolves the great loneliness that drove much of our original emptiness. We discover that we were never actually separate from the source of life. We had simply forgotten our fundamental belonging to the mystery that breathes through all things. Our emptiness was not evidence of our exile, but of our forgetting, not proof of our unworthiness, but preparation for our remembering. In this remembering, the very concept of healing transforms. We are no longer fixing something broken, but recalling something forgotten. We are not becoming someone new, but uncovering who we have always been. We are not filling an empty vessel, but removing the barriers that prevented us from experiencing our inherent fullness. This shift from healing to remembering changes everything about how we engage with our ongoing growth and challenges. Instead of approaching difficulties as problems to be solved, we begin to see them as invitations to deeper recognition of our true nature. Instead of viewing setbacks as failures, we understand them as opportunities to practice choosing authenticity under pressure. From this perspective, even our moments of slipping back into emptiness become sacred. They remind us of the preciousness of presence, the gift of being genuinely ourselves, the miracle of authentic connection. They humble us without shaming us, redirect us without destroying us, teach us without punishing us. This sacred relationship with our own imperfection creates what I call graceful humanity, the ability to be fully human without apology, to make mistakes without self-attack, to be imperfect without feeling worthless. We learn to love ourselves not despite our flaws, but because of our wholeness, which includes everything we are and everything we are becoming. This graceful humanity extends to how we relate to others who are still trapped in their own versions of emptiness. Instead of feeling superior to their struggles, we feel compassionate recognition. Instead of trying to rescue them from their patterns, we offer the gift of our authentic presence. Instead of giving advice about what they should do, we demonstrate through our being what is possible. This demonstration is not performance, but natural overflow. When we are truly present to ourselves, our very existence becomes a kind of teaching. Not the teaching of words or concepts, but the teaching of living example. Others see in us not perfection, but possibility. Not someone who has transcended the human condition, but someone who has learned to inhabit it fully. But this role as living example requires us to remain vigilant about our motivations. There is always the temptation to turn our authenticity into a new form of identity, to become attached to being the one who has figured things out, to use our transformation as a way to feel special or important. The antidote to this spiritual materialism is continued ordinariness. The recognition that what we have discovered is not extraordinary, but simply natural, not special but universal, not rare but available to anyone willing to do the work of returning to themselves. Our healing makes us not superior, but more human, not elevated but more grounded, not separate but more connected. This grounded ordinariness allows our influence to be subtle but profound. We change the world, not through grand gestures or public proclamations, but through the quality of presence we bring to ordinary interactions. We heal the collective wound not through trying to heal others, but through refusing to pass our own wounds forward unconsciously. Every conversation in which we speak from authenticity rather than performance becomes a small revolution. Every relationship in which we show up as ourselves rather than as who we think we should be creates new possibilities for genuine connection. Every choice we make from presence rather than fear contributes to the evolution of human consciousness itself. This understanding transforms our relationship with legacy and meaning. We no longer need to accomplish great things to feel that our lives matter. We do not need to be remembered or celebrated to know that our existence has significance. The simple fact of having learned to be ourselves in a world that often rewards pretense is contribution enough. But from this foundation of knowing our inherent worth, we often find ourselves naturally drawn to forms of service that emerge from our unique gifts and perspectives. Not service driven by obligation or guilt, but service that flows organically from who we have discovered ourselves to be. This authentic service has a quality that is immediately recognizable to those who encounter it. It does not try to convince or convert, but simply offers itself as one possibility among many. It does not demand recognition or gratitude, but gives freely from the abundance of a life that has found its center. It does not promise to solve others' problems, but demonstrates that transformation is possible. Through such service, we participate in what might be called the great healing. Not the healing of any particular person or condition, but the healing of the fundamental wound of separation that plagues our species. Every act of authentic connection, every choice of truth over convenience, every moment of genuine presence contributes to mending this ancient tear in the fabric of human experience. But this healing work requires us to maintain what I call revolutionary ordinariness, the commitment to being genuinely ourselves in every context, regardless of the external pressure to conform or perform. This is perhaps the most radical thing we can do in a world that profits from our disconnection from ourselves. This revolutionary ordinariness manifests differently for each person. For some, it means bringing authentic vulnerability to professional environments that typically reward emotional armor. For others, it involves expressing genuine creativity in contexts that prefer safe predictability. For many, it simply means being honestly themselves in relationships where they once performed whatever role seemed expected. The cumulative effect of millions of people choosing such authentic presence is the gradual transformation of human culture itself. We are participating in a collective awakening, a species-wide remembering of what it means to be both fully individual and fully connected, both authentically human and consciously aware of our deeper nature. This perspective transforms our understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. Meaning is not something we create through achievements or accumulate through experiences. It is something we uncover through the simple act of being genuinely ourselves, moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. In this uncovering, we discover that the emptiness that once haunted us was not our enemy, but our guide, not our curse, but our invitation, not our shame, but our doorway into deeper truth. It was the very thing that forced us to look beyond the surface of existence, to question the assumptions that kept us small, to seek something more authentic than the life we were told we should want. The void that felt like absence was actually presence in disguise, the spacious awareness that is our true nature, temporarily obscured by layers of conditioning but never actually lost. Our journey was not about filling this void, but about recognizing it as the very space of consciousness itself, the open awareness from which all experience arises and into which all experience dissolves. This recognition completes our transformation from emptiness to presence, but it also reveals that they were never actually opposites. Emptiness and presence are two faces of the same mystery, the infinite capacity of consciousness to appear as anything while remaining essentially itself. Our true nature includes both the fullness of authentic expression and the emptiness of pure awareness, both the richness of individual experience and the vastness of universal consciousness. From this integrated understanding, we can embrace the full spectrum of human experience without being diminished by any of it. We can feel deeply without drowning, love fully without losing ourselves, serve others without depleting ourselves, engage with life without being consumed by it. This is the ultimate gift of our journey through emptiness, not the achievement of some permanent state of happiness or fulfillment, but the development of the capacity to meet whatever arises with presence, authenticity, and grace. We become not people who never struggle, but people who struggle consciously, not individuals who never feel empty, but beings who can feel empty without being empty, not personalities who have transcended the human condition, but souls who have learned to inhabit it fully. In this full inhabitation of our humanity, we discover that we are both the question and the answer to the mystery of existence. We are consciousness exploring itself through the particular lens of our individual experience, the universe coming to know itself through our unique way of being alive. Our emptiness was the question. Our presence is the answer. But both are expressions of the same infinite mystery that has no beginning and no end. In learning to embrace both, we find ourselves at home in the paradox of being simultaneously nothing and everything, empty and full, individual and universal, human and divine. This homecoming is not a destination, but a recognition, the remembering that we were never actually lost, never truly empty, never really separate from the source of all life. We are that source, temporarily appearing as individual human beings, exploring the mystery of its own nature through the adventure of forgetting and remembering who we truly are. The journey continues, but now we walk it not as seekers desperately trying to find something outside ourselves, but as expressions of the very thing we once sought. We are consciousness awakening to itself through human experience, love discovering its own infinite nature through the laboratory of individual existence, presence exploring its own possibilities through the vehicle of authentic being. This is why we feel empty, and this is why we heal, not to escape the human experience, but to inhabit it so fully that it becomes transparent to its own divine nature. In learning to be genuinely ourselves, we become windows through which the infinite can look upon itself with wonder, gratitude, and love. The emptiness that brought us here becomes the very space from which our truest gifts emerge. The void we feared transforms into the creative darkness from which new possibilities are born. The absence we struggled to fill reveals itself as the presence that has always been our deepest truth. We are no longer empty because we have remembered that we are the very fullness we once sought outside ourselves. We are no longer lost because we have recognized that we are the home we always longed to find. We are no longer separate because we have awakened to our fundamental unity with all that is. This is the end and the beginning, the completion and the commencement, the answer and the eternal question that consciousness asks itself through every human heart that has the courage to journey from emptiness to presence and back again, forever exploring the infinite mystery of what it means to be alive.